Hello, this is Rogers Hall from Vanderbilt University in the Space Learning and Mobility Lab. And I want to talk a little bit today about some concepts related to the daily round, personal geography, and critical spatial inquiry. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about personal geography, learning in the daily round, personal data, what many people have called the quantified self, but I think more critically, we could ask questions about the quantified other. Who is using your personal data, and then make sure we talk a little bit about critical spatial inquiry. So again, here is the website, and this is the partners. Also, the National Science Foundation has contributed to this. Okay, so the first thing I want to say a little bit about is this concept of personal geography, which we think of as a way of combining personal experience and spatial practices to understand how people think and move through space, and how a personal sense of place could emerge from this. So the idea here is that if space is measured, if it's an abstract concept in that way, place is made by people. And I'm going to share a couple of books with you and some images from them. This book by Catherine Harmon, published in 2004 with the title "You Are Here, Personal Geographies and Other Maps of the Imagination." It's just a beautiful book. It's very, very diverse internally. There are lots of really creative ways of mapping personal experience, social spaces, all sorts of things that are span a huge range of time. So Harmon did a great job of curating these. And I included on the right-hand side a map from Fulford, who is in Connecticut, drawing a handmade map for his nieces of his own route to his elementary school in the neighborhood, and they are now walking along that route. And what they do is X out things that are no longer there, so his memory of that walk doesn't square with theirs, and then his nieces are adding things in, like in pink circles here, like the stinky spot, not sure what that is, and a big rock for climbing on. And so this idea that space, place, time, stories, and memory are all woven and can be mapped together is really an imaginative and sometimes surprising activity. Also included in Harmon's book is material from Dennis Wood, this beautiful book by Siglio Press, which is now out in its second edition, titled "Everything Sings: Maps for a Narrative Atlas." This is a remarkably creative book. Dennis Wood and his students created thematic maps of his Boylan Heights neighborhood for years and years while he was teaching. The cover in purple shows the spatial distribution of carved pumpkins, one Halloween in this neighborhood. And then to the right, we can see telephone and power lines connecting houses to tree canopies that create the affordance for a squirrel highway, what Wood calls a squirrel highway in his neighborhood. So just a very cool way of thinking about sort of a more than human perspective on what lives and happens in the neighborhood. And then the lower image to the left is actually representationally pretty ambitious. So I wanted to spend just a second here. So the morning paper is delivered by a boy named Lester. And here there's a familiar plan view of the neighborhood sort of on the bottom. This is the view that cartographers usually create when they make a map. And then that as the base layer, Lester's movement spools up like a ribbon in time, rising vertically with the passage of time, and is a continuous strip in space. So this begins to get at the concept of what has been called the space-time cube, and this sort of in the visualization world might be called an aquarium graph. And part of what we're doing with this website is trying to make these aquarium graphs more generally available for research and critical inquiry. Okay, let's continue. So what is the daily round? We think of the daily round as the places and paths you visit every day. And they make up everyday routines, habits, and patterns that are recognizable in your physical movement data. We'll talk about physical movement data in a second. So these include places a person usually habitually encounters, recurring activities done in those places, and the ways of interacting with others that support your personal sense of belonging and meaning. when things go well, or your sense of alienation when things don't go well. The image is what I would call a time density plot or a time density surface, which considers how long Laura, a 10-year-old girl, spends in various places on school days and on Saturdays. So this is aggregated over weeks worth of data. And Laura says, sitting in her living room being interviewed about this quietly when she first sees her own spatial data, she says, well, I don't go much of anywhere. But what we see here is sort of a concept of the daily round, places that Laura habitually visits. So we can see that during the school day, she spends a good bit of time at home. She sleeps there, of course, and the majority of her time is spent in school. There are other sort of peaks in there that are time spent in and around the neighborhood after school. On a typical Saturday, Laura engages in recycling with her mother. She visits her friends in the neighborhood, that kind of thing. So this is a visualization of the daily round. What exactly is, so here is an image, a panoramic image of my wife and partner yesterday on a hike out in the wilds of Nashville, Tennessee. And it is possible to gather data about these kinds of activities. This is an image from the free ViewRanger app, which we give you some suggestions about how to use on the myself.org website. And we can see that this image, I marked it up. So this image comes from the Bells Band Park, which is right down on the Cumberland River. You can see that in the green circle. What's happening is my phone is collecting track points with ViewRanger on continuously. Those are stored in a GPX common data format, which you can see to the upper right. These are just little bundles of data that mark a place at a point in time, latitude, longitude, elevation, also probably information about speed and other things. And those can be converted into comma-separated value data tables, which is going to be part of the activity that the myself's website supports. So this is just to give you a sense of how it is that your phone could be used to keep track of your daily round and the richness of experiences along places. Like if we began zooming into this map, we'd find all kinds of things that are relevant to my life and my home life as well as my work life, which is what we're looking at here. So on the right-hand side is an image from my phone, my smartphone, and these are all the track data I've collected over the past 6 months using ViewRanger. So if you see those paths, the sort of black arrows and paths, that's everything I've been doing for months on end, both before the COVID pandemic and after the COVID pandemic. So that is in effect, my home range, my daily round. My life occurs in there. You can see that image from a pond at Bells Band Park is in that space, but there's lots of other stories I could tell about my daily round. This is again on the same day yesterday, looking at some of the park buildings. That appears to be some kind of silo, and there's a museum and ranger station in there. There's a climbing structure over to the right. Very cool place. I recommend checking it out if you're in Nashville. And of course, there are other things. Before the COVID pandemic, this was a favorite place to eat hamburgers and drink beers after we hiked, which is what we're doing in the lower part of the image. And unfortunately, we don't really go in there very much anymore. This is a Sportsman's Grill out on Highway 100. Of course, I spent a lot of time at the university teaching. This is a pre-COVID image, and of course, I was teaching on design thinking, design doing with Dave Owens. Great class. I miss being able to do things like this right now and hope that I'll be able to do them again. And then this is kind of a major part of my life as well, which is swimming. And all these things happen along the black path over there on the right-hand side in the ViewRanger way of looking at my track data. If you're gathering track data, there's a lot you can do just on your phone to examine it or visit your account through your website, a Chrome or Safari browser, and you can dig into those data there as well. Okay, so let's keep going here. This notion of the quantified self and the quantified other. So when your personal data are assembled, they provide an image of who you are and what you do. And many people have called that the quantified self. People kind of hack into their phones in order to get that data off. And this is kind of a new thing. It wasn't available to anyone as long as 10 or 15 years ago. And so this is kind of a new way of thinking about what your personal digital traces could be used to do. But we also want to kind of raise the question of who assembles these data. When you use these apps and devices, in fact, just to have a phone plan, you provision location data to commercial providers who in turn bundle that data and sell it to other commercial vendors. But as this really great article in the Wall Street Journal shares, those commercial vendors also sell that data to our government. And right now our government is also keeping track of where we are. It turns out that every one of our daily rounds seen as a path is a unique shape, and it's very, very easy to tell who an individual is. So this is kind of what is being shown in this video as it plays. This is from the Wall Street Journal. So this is a person moving in New York City, and they visit various places. And this pattern of mobility, which we're all provisioning, so the larger sort of orange trackscape that is shown here is all the data that were available for this article, allows someone to surveil us. So there's this real trade-off. There's a good news, bad news part of this. Like the good news part is very promising for thinking about new ways to support learning on the move and people gaining access to their own data. The bad news part of this is that others have access to us. We have become a quantified other for commercial and governmental oversight and regulation. So I just wanted to, mention that. There's an interesting argument by Shoshana Zuboff, great article on this in January 24th, 2020, New York Times, in which she calls this surveillance capitalism and argues that it is an emerging dystopian future in which elite data scientists can use our digital connectivity to control democratic institutions, consumption, and voting behavior. And she argues, quoting from the article, our digital century was to have been democracy's golden age. Instead, we enter its third decade marked by a stark new form of social inequality, best understood as epistemic inequality. The inequality is sort of the rights to these data and knowing how to use them. So these are contradictory times for sure. I wanted to end with sort of an exploration of a concept of critical spatial inquiry. So we typically think about space as an objective and abstract concept, the concept used and created by architects or urban planners, for example. Critical spatial inquiry questions this concept, its objectivity and its abstract qualities, and by studying and reflecting on how space is designed, how it changes over time, and how it influences our own and others' lives in ways that are powerful but often invisible. And this is a neat article just out recently in the New York Times about how decades of racist housing policy have left neighborhoods sweltering, producing heat islands. So in this case, the concept of critical spatial inquiry, which has the nice acronym CSI, we can repurpose the meaning of that, asks us to think about how redlining policies created and enforced on residential lending in the 1930s have influenced the built environment of city neighborhoods to create urban heat islands today. Much the same could be shown for patterns of economic investment or disinvestment, things like that. So the gist of this is that layering stories of everyday life, telling ourselves over thematic maps built using aggregate data, ways of telling about society, bring up new relations and new critical understandings. And that's what we're really trying to support here. So let's go through this just quickly. In the lower right-hand corner, I'm showing you two maps at roughly the same scale, just to give you some clue as to what's going on here. So here is a map showing regions in Richmond, Virginia that were redlined in the 1930s. And so these were regions where, because there were predominantly Black residents, they were seen as risky places to invest in supporting mortgages and real estate lending. And so there was disinvestment in these areas. And if you follow that up into today, these are also primarily the hottest places in town for reasons that are also available, or at least hints at the reasons for this are available in other layers of data. So this is contemporary tree cover in redlined areas from the 1930s, and you can see that the trees are fairly sparse, so there's not a lot of shade in these areas, and that has consequences for the highest summer temperatures, which are shown here from cooler in blue to hotter in red. So if you just kind of jump back and forth, if you let your eyes jump back and forth, you get a sense of this sort of spatial correlation. And something that happened in the 1930s, a housing and lending policy in the 1930s, has had consequences for the tree cover, which has consequences for heat island today. So this is a period of 90 years of change. Trees are growing or not growing. Multiple generations of people are buying houses or not buying houses. Asphalt is being put on the ground, all sorts of things like this. So this is a really interesting form of critical spatial analysis. So that's it. I hope that this quick video has given you some things to think with on the concepts of personal geography, learning along the daily round, personal data, the quantified self, which is you having control of those data, and the quantified other people having control of those data, and examples of how you can use stories, qualitative and quantitative thematic maps to do forms of critical spatial inquiry. And again, I really recommend that you go check out the website, www.myselfs.org, and communicate with us. We'd love to be able to talk with you. Bye-bye.